You acknowledge that the West is collapsing, that the United States is collapsing, that Canada will soon collapse, that Europe is collapsing. You acknowledge all this, you're aware of it, you agree with it, you can see it happening, but you don't want to move out of your country. You don't want to move out of the Western world. You don't want to move out of the United States. You don't want to move out of Europe. You don't want to move out of Canada. So what do? Is that even an option? Yes, that is an option. As I've said before, I understand, I don't like this, but I understand that most of you in my audience are not going to ever move out of your collapsing Western country. You are too scared to do it, or you think you can't do it, which is an excuse, which I probably would disagree with, but whatever you want to do, it's your life. I understand that most of you are not going to move out of your country, your collapsing Western country, and we're talking again about the collapsing trifecta. So that would be America, Europe, and Canada. Let's call that AEC. The collapsing AEC, America, Europe, Canada. The collapsing AEC, you want to stay in the AEC for whatever reason you have. So what do? Today I'm going to talk about the 6 things that you need to have in place if you decide to stay in your collapsing Western country for the rest of your life. Yes, if you adopt Alpha 2.0 models, you can survive and even thrive by staying in the collapsing Western world, but only if you do these 6 things. If you don't do these 6 things and you choose to stay in the AEC, you're in big trouble. We'll talk about them in detail. I am Caleb Jones. This is Alpha Male 2.0, freedom-focused lifestyle design for men. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. We do 5 videos a week here on how to make both your business life and your woman life more free, because you need both. By the way, we're doing an online course giveaway right now. This is my online course on how you can design your own location-independent business, which, by the way, we will be talking about in a minute. And I normally charge about $1,400 for that, but you might be able to get it for free. All you need to do is subscribe here at YouTube, like this video, and leave a comment at YouTube. And every 2 weeks, I will post the winner of the drawing at the community feed here at this YouTube channel. Okay, so what are the 6 things you need to make sure that you have in your life, in your logistical life, and in your financial life to make sure that you're going to be okay if you decide to stay in your collapsing Western nation? Now, you and I could talk about the various reasons why you want to stay in your collapsing Western world. We could discuss those things, but let's not talk about those excuses. I would probably disagree with the vast majority of your excuses. And I think that in most cases, when you say, I can't move out of the AEC because, I can give you many reasons why you could move out of the AEC even though you have that excuse. So usually when you don't want to move out of the United States or Europe or Canada, it's because of an excuse you have, an irrational reason, not a real logistical reason. It is rare that I have heard real logistical reasons that actually make sense in terms of why you can't move. But let's not go through that today. I'm going to be super nice today and just say, okay, you want to stay in the collapsing United States, you want to stay in suicidal Europe, you want to stay in cuckoo Canada, that's fine. These are the 6 things you need to do. Okay? Number 1, top of the list. This is an Alpha Male 2.0 requirement anyway, but I'm being very complete with this list. You must have your own business. If you decide to stay in the United States, Canada, Europe, and you have a job, you have a corporate job, kiss your ass goodbye, you're done. Now, right now, you might be okay. You might be okay over the next few years, but long term, you're screwed. You can lose your job, and you probably will lose your job eventually, for a massive host of reasons, none of which may even be your fault. You can get fired, you can get laid off, your industry could change, all kinds of stuff. You are at the whim of your employer. When you have a job, you are not free. Even if you make $1 million a year, you are not free if you have a job. You have to have your own business. That's the way this goes. I'm sorry, but you've got to have your own business. So if you decide to stay in the United States, Canada, Europe, AEC, you better have your own business. And if you don't have your own business, you need to get started now. Start your Alpha 2.0 business on the side right now. I've given you all the resources to do that. If you don't like my business resources, you can use someone else's, but get that going now. That is critical for you, more so than, matter of fact, you can make the argument that you could move out of the United States or AEC, Europe, Canada. You could move out and get a job somewhere in the non-Western world and actually be safer than if you have a job in the AEC. So you need to make sure you have your own business. There's no way around that. You've got to have your own business. You cannot rely long-term on a corporate job to take care of you. Cool? Cool. Let's make this pretty. There we go. Next one. Again, an Alpha 2.0 minimum anyway, but I'm being complete. You must have location-independent income. If you are locked in to the city in which you live, if you're going to stay the rest of your life in the collapsing AEC, if you're stuck living in that city, you're screwed. What if something happens to that city where you need to move? What if you need to move for other reasons, which you probably will as the Western world continues to collapse? You're screwed if you have a job. Certainly if you have a job, you have location-dependent income. But if you have your own business that is a location-dependent business, boy, are you in big trouble. I would be terrified right now if I had a location-dependent business based in United States, Europe, or Canada. I would be really, really nervous. So if that's you, guess what? If you're going to stay in the United States, Canada, Europe for the rest of your life, you need to reorient your business to make sure it is location independent. Again, I have resources for that. Whatever resources you want to use, please use them. You cannot be location dependent if you're going to stay in the collapsing Western world for the rest of your life. That is suicide. That's crazy. Don't do it. All right, next one. This one is a little more obvious to most guys. I've already had many of you bring this up, and you're correct. If you decide to stay in the AEC for the rest of your life, certainly if you decide to stay in the United States for the rest of your life, you cannot live in a city. You've got to get out of the city, at the bare minimum into the outer suburbs. Matter of fact, I'll draw something up here in a second. But as I've said on prior videos, and we're experiencing this now in the United States, also in Europe to a degree, in the collapsing USA, as of right now, as of 2020, you are going to experience civil unrest on a consistent basis or near consistent basis in many, if not most, of American cities. It's just something Americans are going to have to start getting used to. I didn't say a civil war. I'm talking about civil unrest. SJWs who are bored, smashing buildings and burning shit down. Bored MAGA guys going into those areas, trying to look for trouble. Authoritarian cops shooting people left and right. You're going to have all of these things in many, if not most, American cities from now until the final collapse occurs. Whenever that occurs, we don't know. But that's a norm now. So if you decide to live in a downtown area in the United States, certainly in the United States, but also in Europe and even Canada, Canada's going to be, better off than those other two, but eventually it'll happen there. That's very stupid. You do not want to live in a city. Now let me explain how this works, because I've talked about this on my blogs before. Do I want to exit? Yes, I want to exit. Speaking in general, most cities, not all cities, but most cities are configured in a way where you have the central core, that's the downtown area. Then you have the outer core, which is the downtown area, but not literally downtown. You know what I'm saying? You're still in the city, but you're not in the core of the city. Outside of that, you've got the suburbs. And you know what suburbs means? I've lived in suburbs most of my entire life. That's just kind of where I am. And then outside the suburbs, you've got, my circle's getting bigger, the outer suburbs. That is between the suburbs and rural. That is where you are still in the suburbs, you still have grocery stores, maybe a movie theater or two, but anything beyond that, you'll have to travel a little further into the city. And then beyond that, you have rural. Those are guys who live out in the middle of fucking nowhere with a farm, 2-3 hours outside of town. What you need to do, if you're going to stay in the collapsing Western world for the rest of your life, if that's the decision you're making, you must live either here or here, in the outer suburbs or rural. You don't have to live rural if you don't want to. Matter of fact, I'll tell you where I live. Where I live right now, I live literally right there. I'm on the edge of the outer suburbs. You can actually see from my balcony the end of civilization, the last town before it's just hundreds and hundreds of miles of forest and mountains. So I'm on the very edge of rural, but I'm not rural. I don't think I want to be rural. I don't think I want that kind of lifestyle. I like having grocery stores and a mall and movie theaters close by and things like that. I like having some of that stuff. I don't have a lot of it because I'm in the outer suburbs. Now, here's one downside to living in the outer suburbs that I've discussed before. Dating is more difficult when you live out here. It is. It's easier when you live here, dating in your woman life. So certainly if you live in a downtown core, you could say, but I like living downtown because it's easier to get laid and easier to manage women. That's all true. But you're living in the collapsing Western world and you're not going to move. So guess what? You don't have that option anymore. You've got to be like me. You have to move out to the outer suburbs. I have lived in the suburbs or outer suburbs my entire adult life, and I haven't had any major problems dating. Yes, logistically, I have to travel a little more in terms of driving a little more, Uber and Lyft and things like that. It is a little more complicated in terms of logistics in your woman life when you live further out. It is certainly complicated if you live out in a rural area. No question about that. But that's the way it goes. That's the price you pay when you want to live in your collapsing Western nation. You cannot live in a downtown area. That's just the way this goes, dude. I wish I had better news for you, but you've got to do this. You cannot live in a city. You're going to be very unhappy going forward if you live in a major city going forward, certainly in the United States. You don't want to do it. You don't want to deal with the vandalism, the civil unrest, and all that other junk. Cool? Cool. All right, hang on. I got to bring this shit back up here. Number 4. This one's a little more complicated. Location independent income, if you decide to live in the collapsing Western world for the rest of your life, is not enough. Now, it's okay, it's good, but here's the problem. Let's say you live in, I don't know, let's say you live in Kansas. You're out in the middle of nowhere in Kansas in the United States. You say, I'm going to hole up in Kansas and live here the rest of my life. And I have a location independent Alpha 2.0 business. But let's say most of that market is Chicago. Well, what happens when the United States collapses and Chicago collapses? You're going to have a problem, right? So, location independent income when you decide to live in the collapsing Western world isn't quite enough. You want to have a lot of your income sourced outside of the West. Certainly, now I think all Alpha Male 2.0 should do this. I'm certainly working on this. But certainly, if you're going to live in the United States or Europe or Canada for the rest of your life, this is mandatory for you. You don't have a choice. You cannot rely 100% on income from the Western world when you live in the Western world, even if you have location independent income. So you can set whatever goal you want to set in terms of what percentage of income comes from the West and what percentage comes from outside the West. I will give you what my goal is. You can copy this or not. You don't have to do this. This is just my example. So my goal, I've talked about this before, one of my big business goals is to get to the point in the next few years where 60% of my income from all of my income streams and all of my companies does not come from the collapsing trifecta. That is, United States, Europe, and Canada. So I want the United States, Europe, and Canada to only represent a grand total of 40% of my total income. That's one of my big goals. Now, I'm not there yet. My foreign source income right now is about 22%. I need to get that up to 60%. Then I'm comfortable. That way, when the Western world collapses, which it will collapse in our lifetime, instead of being completely fucked financially, I will be inconvenienced. So the Western world collapses and 60% of my income does not come from the Western world, then what will happen to me is some numbers will change on a screen and I'll say, God damn it, and that's it. But that'll be it. I won't be screwed. You guys with 100% Western income will be screwed. And as I've said many times about this, a lot of guys get confused about this. There is a difference between being completely fucked and being inconvenienced. Guys will say, well, Caleb, even if you're foreign, other countries, their incomes are going to drop if the Western world collapses. That's correct. But there's a difference between having a minor inconvenience in your financial life, business life, having foreign sourced income, and being completely fucked by having no income because it's all coming from the United States, or the vast majority of it's coming from the United States. Make sense? So, if you're going to live in the collapsing AEC for the rest of your life, guess what you need to do? Not only do you need an Alpha 2.0 location independent business, but you also need to make sure that a significant percentage, if not most, of that income coming from that business is coming from outside of the AEC. United States, Canada, Europe. Cool? Cool. Not as hard as you might think when you're already location independent. Just a few shifts. It's not that big of a deal. And frankly, the less money you want to make, if your goal is just to make $75,000 a year location dependent, which is the Alpha 2.0, and that's it, it's a lot easier to get a big percentage of that outside the United States or Europe or Canada. It's a lot easier. Now, if you have bigger income goals, it's a little more complicated. I make a little more than that. I make a lot more than that, actually. So it's a little more complicated for me, but it's doable. In a few more years, I'll have that. It's not a big deal. Okay? All right. Next one. This is big. And again, I teach this already. I teach a zero debt lifestyle. If you have debt, you are not free. The Bible says, and I'm not a Christian, but the Bible says, one of the parts of the Bible that actually is right, is that you are a slave to the lender. That's correct. When you have debt, the person or entity in charge of your life is the bank or person to whom you owe money to. You don't want to owe any money. So if you have debt, you need to pay that shit off, especially if you're going to live in the collapsing Western world the rest of your life. You don't want any debt. If you have debt, you have a higher monthly nut that you need to crack every month, and that's going to be very difficult if you're having income trouble because you live in a collapsing society. Make sense? You want your monthly nut to be as small as you can. You don't want to be in a scenario where the bank is going to come and take your house or take your car, which happened in the 80s during the savings and loan crisis. A lot of you guys are my age or older, you remember that. You remember how the federal government came in and took these guys' farms, took these guys' planes, these farmers and stuff, and it wasn't their fault because the banks called in the loans, these guys couldn't pay the loans. That's the kind of thing that's going to happen as the West continues to collapse. You don't want to have that problem, and if you don't have any debt, you don't have that problem. I have had no debt for years. It's a very, very nice lifestyle when you have no debt. Now, there's one complicated aspect of this. Some guys will say, hey, Caleb, it is possible that the United States will collapse via a hyperinflationary currency crisis, and if that's the case, you want a lot of debt, like Robert Kiyosaki says, because then you can pay it off more easily because the debt will be worth less. That is a very complicated discussion that is really outside the scope of this video. The bottom line is, by the time that happens, you will have suffered so many other problems because of your debt, that benefit will not have been worth it. If you're operating at the Robert Kiyosaki level where you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, then yes, you can finagle some of that stuff. You're probably not in that category. I'm certainly not, so that's not an issue for you. You need to pay off your debt if you're going to live in the collapsing Western world for the rest of your life. Very simple. Okay, last one, number 6. Is that the last one? Yes. This one's a little more complicated, and some of you are on top of this and some of you aren't already. In your investments, you need to have investments that are safe from the government and safe from currency fluctuations. What do I mean? Well, if you live in the collapsing Western world, let's say you choose to live in the United States for the rest of your life, and your investments are all like the stock market inside your fucking 401k or your IRA, you're screwed. Those are government instruments. The government, as the West continues to collapse, is going to start doing all kinds of crazy shit with those. You don't control your 401k, the fucking government does. You don't control your IRA, the government does. And if you are outside the United States, please translate for whatever terms you have in your country for IRA, 401k, things like that, retirement instruments. You don't want those if you're going to live in the Western world. I don't have any of those, and I don't want them, and I'm moving out of the Western world soon. And even I don't have those things. I don't want them, number one. Number two, your investments need to be currency safe. So if there's trouble with your currency, if the value of your currency collapses, which is very, very likely for the US dollar and the euro, Canada dollar maybe not, depends. But if you have that kind of scenario where you're going to live in the Western world, you want to have investments that will do well or at least do okay even if you enter into a state of hyperinflation. That basically means 3 classes of investments. Number 1, precious metals, particularly gold. But silver, palladium, a few others could qualify. Number 2, cryptocurrency. Now there's an argument that cryptocurrency would not do well in a hyperinflationary market, but you'll be a lot better off with cryptos than you would like with stocks or something like that. So cryptocurrency. Number 3, for those of you who have the wherewithal, would be real estate, particularly foreign real estate. Those 3 things. If all you've got is a savings account with a bunch of cash and fucking American stocks, and you're going to stay in the Western world for the rest of your life, you're fucked. No. You need to be a little more complicated than that. Unfortunately, you've got to configure your investment life to make sure that you'll be okay if and when there are currency problems, which are coming, particularly to the United States. Oh my God. All right, so that's it. These 6 things. You need to have all 6 of these things. When I talk to a lot of you will say, hey, Caleb, man, I'm going to stay in the United States, but I'm covered, man. I talked to a guy about 2 or 3 days ago. He's like, hey, man, I'm going to hole up in North Dakota. I'm in rural North Dakota. I got my own farm. I got my bullets. I got my water. I got all my shit. I'm good to go, man. And I got cryptocurrencies and I'm good to go. Well, that's good. That's good. That's a start. That means he's covered, let's see, number 3, and he's covered number 6. Then I asked him, what do you do for income? Well, I have a job. You're fucked. You need to start your own business. So you need all 6 of these things, not just some of them, not just the ones that turn you on. Obviously, if you think Bitcoin is really fun, you probably already covered number 6, right? Obviously, if you're a guy like me and you hate debt, you probably covered number 5. Make sense? Some of you guys are business owners, but you're not location independent in your business. You're location dependent. Not going to cut it if you're going to stay in the United States, Canada, or Europe for the rest of your life. By the way, I think I might get this question in the comments. Caleb, why are you not talking about disaster preparedness stuff like having 30 days of food and water and electricity and bullets? Okay, so I have already written an article called Disaster Preparedness for the Alpha Male 2.0 at the Caleb Jones blog. So you can Google Caleb Jones blog, Disaster Preparedness for the Alpha Male 2.0. And I go through about 16, 17 things you need to have in place for disasters. For example, I have 30 days of non-perishable food. I have 14 days of water, not just drinking water, but for bathing and washing, for me and Pink Firefly both. I can survive 30 days, actually probably more than 30 days, without any electricity. I have all that stuff. I have all those backups in place now. When COVID hit, I didn't have any problems because I always have 2 months of toilet paper and paper towels as a buffer at all times. That's disaster preparedness. That's a little different than when the Western world collapses. It does apply. Disaster preparedness applies to things like if there's civil unrest, if there's a hurricane, if the power goes out for a week, tsunami, shit like that. Yes, you need to have those things in place as well, but everybody should have those things in place, not just people living in the West. These are the additional things you need beyond disaster preparedness if you're seriously planning on living in the United States or Europe or Canada for the rest of your life, even though you know it's collapsing. Cool? So, in the future, when someone says to me, hey, Caleb, you don't have to move out of the United States. I think I'll be okay. I can point them to this video and say, yeah, you'll be okay if you've got all 6 of these things in place. If you don't, you will not be okay. And you should just move out of the country. Or stay in your collapsing Western country, but get this shit done. Cool? If you need help with these things, particularly the business and investment aspects, you can go to joinsmic.com. That is my audio training and mentorship program. Or in the meantime, if you like, you can click here to learn about 11 countries you could move to if you want to escape the collapsing Western world. Or you can click here on how to start your own Alpha 2.0 business when you already have a job. See you soon.